the Irtish boats, and no doubt a captive, as Marfa Strogoff was. He could do nothing for them. Should he ever see them again? At this question, to which he dared not reply, his heart sank very low. At the same time with Michael Strogoff and so many other prisoners, Harry Blount and Alcide Jolivet had also been taken to the Tartar camp. Their former traveling companion, captured like them at the telegraph office, knew that they were penned up with him in the enclosure, guarded by numerous sentinels, but he did not wish to accost them. It mattered little to him, at this time especially, what they might think of him since the affair at Ichim. Besides, he desired to be alone, that he might act alone if necessary. He therefore held himself aloof from his former acquaintances. From the moment that Harry Blount had fallen by his side, Jolivet had not ceased his attentions to him. During the journey from Kolyvan to the camp, that is to say for several hours, Blount, by leaning on his companion's arm, had been enabled to follow the rest of the prisoners. He tried to make known that he was a British subject, but it had no effect on the barbarians, who only replied by prods with a lance or a sword. The correspondent of the Daily Telegraph was, therefore, obliged to submit to the common lot, resolving to protest later, and obtain satisfaction for such treatment. But the journey was not the less disagreeable to him, for his wound caused him much pain, and without Alcide Jolivet's assistance he might never have reached the camp. Jolivet, whose practical philosophy never abandoned him, had physically and morally strengthened his companion by every means in his power. His first care, when they found themselves definitely established in the enclosure, was to examine Blount's wound. Having managed carefully to draw off his coat, he found that the shoulder had been only grazed by the shot. "This is nothing," he said, "a mere scratch. After 2 or 3 dressings you will be all to rights." "But these dressings?" asked Blount. "I will make them for you myself." "Then you are something of a doctor?" "All Frenchmen are something of doctors." And on this affirmation Alcide, tearing his handkerchief, made lint of one piece, bandages of the other, took some water from a well dug in the middle of the enclosure, bathed the wound, and skillfully placed the wet rag on Harry Blount's shoulder. "I treat you with water," he said. "This liquid is the most efficacious sedative known for the treatment of wounds, and is the most employed now. Doctors have taken 6,000 years to discover that. Yes, 6,000 years in round numbers." "I thank you, Monsieur Jolivet," answered Harry, stretching himself on a bed of dry leaves, which his companion had arranged for him in the shade of a birch tree. "Bah, it's nothing. You would do as much for me." "I am not quite so sure," said Blount candidly. "Nonsense, stupid! All English are generous." "Doubtless, but the French?" "Well, the French, they are brutes if you like. But what redeems them is that they are French. Say nothing more about that, or rather say nothing more at all. Rest is absolutely necessary for you." But Harry Blount had no wish to be silent. If the wound, in prudence, required rest, the correspondent of the Daily Telegraph was not a man to indulge himself. "Monsieur Jolivet," he asked, "do you think that our last dispatches have been able to pass the Russian frontier?" "Why not?" answered Alcide. "By this time you may be sure that my beloved cousin knows all about the affair at Kolyvan." "How many copies does your cousin work off of her dispatches?" asked Blount, for the first time putting his question direct to his companion. "Well," answered Alcide, laughing, "my cousin is a very discreet person, who does not like to be talked about, and who would be in despair if she troubled the sleep of which you are in need." "I don't wish to sleep," replied the Englishman. "What will your cousin think of the affairs of Russia?" "That they seem for the time in a bad way. But bah! The Muscovite government is powerful. It cannot be really uneasy at the invasion of barbarians." "Too much ambition has lost the greatest empires," answered Blount, who was not exempt from a certain English jealousy with regard to Russian pretensions in Central Asia. "Oh, do not let us talk politics!" cried Jolivet. "It is forbidden by the faculty. Nothing can be worse for wounds in the shoulder, unless it was to put you to sleep." "Let us, then, talk of what we ought to do," replied Blount. "Monsieur Jolivet, I have no intention at all of remaining a prisoner to these Tartars for an indefinite time."
"Nor I either, by Jove."
"We will escape on the first opportunity?"
"Yes, if there is no other way of regaining our liberty."
"Do you know of any other?" asked Blount, looking at his companion.
"Certainly. We are not belligerents. We are neutral, and we will claim our freedom."
"From that brute of a Feofar Khan?"
"No, he would not understand," answered Jolivet; "but from his lieutenant, Ivan Ogareff."
"He is a villain."
"No doubt. But the villain is a Russian. He knows that it does not do to trifle with the rights of men, and he has no interest to retain us. On the contrary. But to ask a favor of that gentleman does not quite suit my taste."
"But that gentleman is not in the camp, or at least I have not seen him here," observed Blount.
"He will come. He will not fail to do that. He must join the Emir. Siberia is cut in two now, and very certainly Feofar's army is only waiting for him to advance on Irkutsk."
"And once free, what shall we do?"
"Once free we will continue our campaign, and follow the Tartars, until the time comes when we can make our way into the Russian camp. We must not give up the game. No, indeed, we have only just begun. You, friend, have already had the honor of being wounded in the service of the Daily Telegraph, whilst I have as yet suffered nothing in my cousin's service. Well, well, good," murmured Alcide Jolivet. "There he is asleep. A few hours' sleep and a few cold water compresses are all that are required to set an Englishman on his legs again. These fellows are made of cast iron."
And whilst Harry Blount rested, Alcide watched near him, after having drawn out his notebook, which he loaded with notes, determined besides to share them with his companion, for the greater satisfaction of the readers of the Daily Telegraph. Events had united them one with the other. They were no longer jealous of each other. So then the thing that Michael Strogoff dreaded above everything was the most lively desire of the two correspondents. Ivan Ogareff's arrival would evidently be of use to them. Blount and Jolivet's interest was, therefore, contrary to that of Michael. The latter well understood the situation, and it was one reason, added to many others, which prevented him from approaching his former traveling companions. He therefore managed so as not to be seen by them. 4 days passed thus without the state of things being in any wise altered. The prisoners heard no talk of the breaking up of the Tartar camp. They were strictly guarded. It would have been impossible for them to pass the cordon of foot and horse soldiers which watched them night and day. As to the food which was given them it was barely sufficient. Twice in the 24 hours they were thrown a piece of the intestines of goats grilled on the coals, or a few bits of that cheese called krout, made of sour ewe's milk, and which, soaked in mare's milk, forms the Kirghiz dish, commonly called kumis. And this was all. It may be added that the weather had become detestable. There were considerable atmospheric commotions, bringing squalls mingled with rain. The unfortunate prisoners, destitute of shelter, had to bear all the inclemencies of the weather, nor was there the slightest alleviation to their misery. Several wounded women and children died, and the prisoners were themselves compelled to dig graves for the bodies of those whom their jailers would not even take the trouble to bury. During this trying period Alcide Jolivet and Michael Strogoff worked hard, each in the portions of the enclosure in which they found themselves. Healthy and vigorous, they suffered less than so many others, and could better endure the hardships to which they were exposed. By their advice, and the assistance they rendered, they were of the greatest possible use to their suffering and despairing fellow captives. Was this state of things to last? Would Feofar Khan, satisfied with his first success, wait some time before marching on Irkutsk? Such, it was to be feared, would be the case. But it was not so. The event so much wished for by Jolivet and Blount, so much dreaded by Michael, occurred on the morning of the 12th of August. On that day the trumpets sounded, the drums beat, the cannon roared. A huge cloud of dust swept along the road from Kolyvan. Ivan Ogareff, followed by several thousand men, made his entry into the Tartar camp. End of Book 2, Chapter 1.